What if we just saw the greatest understudy performance in the history of cricket?
This show is called Last Knock. I don't really understand why it is called that.
Yes, there's a lot of recency bias there. And in these situations, people tend to forget, some backup player coming in and scoring 600 runs when the main opener was busy and then getting dropped and being forgotten forever. But right now, I can't think about anything other than the fact that Akshar Patel was a backup player and he took 27 wickets in a series to help India come back from 0-1 to 3-1. Think back to what you thought about Akshar before this, that he was probably a backup white ball player for India and a very good IPL player over the last couple of years. Well, whatever that theory was that you had on him, he just burned it up completely. He will forever be the guy that just took the beating heart out of England's batting and stomped on it 27 times. People got upset when I referred to him as the Walmart Jadeja, but I don't think people understand just how highly irate Jadeja in the last few years. He's been a world-class player in two disciplines and is good enough to be a frontline batsman at number 7 with it. And somehow, India have a player who could replace him in the 11 without them losing massively in any of those areas. Sure, away he may not be as good with the ball, and his batting may take a little bit longer to come on, and he's tall and slim, but maybe not quite a fielding predator. But if Ben Stokes or Jason Holder have to stop playing, there's no experienced all-rounder who their team can just plug and play into the lineup, who basically does all the same things at a good enough level to be very good at Test cricket. It's hard enough to find one Stokes or Holder or Jadeja, but to find a backup as well, that's disgusting. And he took those wickets at 10.59. And people will say, right, he took those wickets in favourable circumstances on their home pitches. And that's true, but how many players in the history of the game have played their first 3 tests on friendly home pitches and not taken 27 wickets? I'm guessing it's quite a few. I know for a fact that 657 wickets have taken more than 25 wickets in test match cricket. And I know that only one of them averages under 10.75, the magical George Lohman line. Look at them all here on this graph, whichever way we end up putting it. And he's right at the front. And he can bat as well. And not so much in this series, but he does have a good first-class batting. But India didn't need his batting. In fact, they even picked Washington Sundar to strengthen their batting more as they slipped Akshar down to number 9. The final innings was the first time he looked like a guy who had ever made 95 for Durham. And then he ran himself out. But my overall point still stands, that India somehow managed to find a replacement for the unreplaceable cricketer, and then the understudy went radioactive. You can point at helpful pitches and friendly English batsmen all you want, but Akshar's wickets came from bowling brilliantly. He wasn't lucky. What he did was repeatable. He bowled fast, accurate finger spin from a height. That's a thing. Yeah, this probably won't last. He averages 28 in first-class cricket, and he's not a better bowler than Jadeja. But that doesn't matter. There are some times as an analyst where I need to slice and dice to tell people exactly what is going on and why. Be the cold cup of coffee that people really need. And then there are times to go, Akshar Patel took 27 wickets in 3 tests at fucking 10.59. Sound the bells, alert the villagers. This is crazy, this is not normal. I can't explain all of this. All I have in my head is the sound of his fast, slow left arm thudding into the pads and stumps like the world's slowest tracer bullets. From his hand onto England stumps into our hearts. And it's probably not true, and I'll possibly think of someone better later on, but right now, I can't think of a better test understudy than Akshar Patel. And I don't want you to think that he was all alone in this series. He and R. Ashwin combined to take more wickets than England. Even though Akshar didn't play in the first test. It's like Spofford and Boyle. There's a reference for the kiddies. And let's look at Ashwin for a moment, because I've been thinking of Muhammad Ali fighting that Ernie bloke, as most of you have. In that fight, he kept yelling, "What's my name?" And it's been really telling that since R. Ashwin asked people to stop calling him Ravi, he's been in incredible form. Taking wickets with skillful off-spin is not quite like punching a big bloke in the face lots of times, but you get the point. It's like when he tormented Dan Lawrence by pulling out of a delivery late, and then bowling the ball through his legs another time, or just confusing the kid in every which way he could. Where it looked like Ashwin had matched his physical powers with his mental ones, where he could put the ball exactly where he wanted to and how he wanted it, when he needed it to be there, and he knew what he was doing for the next ball and the next over and the next spell and the next test. England were batting in checkers and Ashwin was playing 5D chess. With Ashwin's back already starting to break down, this might be a small window of him in absolute excelsius. That magic moment where the wrist and fingers merge perfectly with that supervillain mind of his. And if you're thinking again, well, it was him at home and the English batsman, remember that Ashwin just outbowled Nathan Lyon in Australia. Oh, and in this series, he made 100 too. He's playing a theremin with his mind right now, people. And it seems like this review is just me finding Indian players that have played really well and mentioning them. So let's toss in Rohit Sharma, who the BCCI doctored the pitches so badly that only he could bat on them. I am old enough to remember when he played the worst shot in Test cricket history and proved that he couldn't play this game. I'm also seem to remember everyone calling him a flat track bully. Now it seems like he's a ragging Turner bully? There were so many times in this series where it looked like he was playing a different sport than the other batters. And Rohit Ball, which is a very bad name, but was very lovely to watch. They say the best players have so much more time, but Rohit seemed to be batting on a different spectrum to everyone else. He seems to be one of those batters who at his very best, he's telling the bowler what ball he wants next. And I'm sure your uncle is already writing this off as runs at home. But you know, almost no one else in this series made runs, and he made a lot of runs. And until he makes runs at home and away, or does what David Warner does and just makes so many runs at home that it doesn't really matter anymore, the Rohit Sharma experiment as an opener is still unfinished. But in this tiny sample size, I just found that he was beautiful. And it is worth remembering again that India's top order was not exactly killing it in this series. Gill struggled, Pujara did a bit too, Virat played a couple of very skillful non-hundreds, and Rahane continued to not make runs in India. They've won 3-1 at home against a team they are better than, but there is still a lot of work to do, especially with this top order. It seems weird to say that India's batting is a concern after winning this easy, but it's certainly not quite the finished article right now. And neither is Rishabh Pant, but he certainly was pretty good in this series. And we don't need to go through his entire recent history, but remember back to his first game in Melbourne where he played the worst shot in Test history and proved he couldn't play this game. Then he seemed to do okay in the following Test in Australia, but no one really followed that series, did they? But he did play 2 pretty good innings early on in this series, but this last innings was, it was something else. Sure, there was still normal stuff in it, like edges over slips and one-handed cover drives to wide balls that he could have gone out. But when Pant came to the crease, it looked like it was very possible that England would actually have a first innings lead. And when he was out, it looked far more likely that India would win by an innings. And he did all this on a pitch where not even Rohit could score easily on. And this from a guy who India seemed almost intent on ruining for a little while, who batted in the last IPL like he'd been invited to his auntie's bridge club. This was the innings that booked India into the World Test Championship final, which is a far bigger phrase than I thought it was going to be. And think about this, Pant is still not the best wicketkeeper India have. That's Saha, who even by modern batting standards for wicketkeepers is still a really good bat. He may be the best gloveman in the world, although Ben Foakes certainly made a play for that in this series. This just shows what incredible depth India have right now. I don't even know what they do with Akshar and Sundar in the next test. I say play them all and just have fun with it. But there is a chance that Sundar, Akshar and Siraj don't even play in India's next test. That's some incredible talent there. And it's worth looking at England just a little bit, because it's not like England don't have a lot of talent lying around. In fact, they have so much talent that they decided they were going to show it to us by this constant rotation of player. I'm pretty sure they were rotating players on a near session-by-session basis at one point. Honestly, until I looked it up, I had forgotten that Ollie Stone not only played a test, but took 4 wickets at an average of 17, and then they didn't pick him again. And we've all lost count of how many wicketkeepers England actually have and which one is in any particular test match. Even allowing for England and COVID and the fact that they want to win the Ashes and the World T20 more than they did this series. Has any team ever made more of a mess of selection when they have a good team and a lead in a series? I mean, probably. And it's probably England, isn't it? Especially like in the old days where grounds usually pick the teams and they just pick them on, gate receipts. But come on, this was pretty mad for a modern cricket team. At At best, England had, a quarter of a mind on this series, having players jetting in and out like it was a 39-pound fare to Ibiza or something. In 6 tests on their Asian adventure, England managed to play their best spinner in 1 of them. Then they picked a bowling lineup for Headingley when they got to Ahmedabad, and then when they absolutely, positively had to win the last test, they picked 3 frontline bowlers, brought in a specialist number 7 batter, and asked their star batsman to, bowl more. And none of that mentions what the hell went on with Dom Bess on this entire tour. It turns out that Moeen Ali getting COVID was the absolute worst thing that ever happened to Dom Bess. It's pretty apparent now that England's plan pretty much from the beginning was to play Moeen Ali for the first 4 tests, and then with Bess having spent a lot of time on the tour, come in for the final 2. But when he got COVID, that meant Bess had to play, and he took perhaps one of the luckiest 5 for 30s you will ever see. And I say that in full knowledge that Joe Root just took 5 for 8. But everyone knew, Bess included, that that was a lucky spell. But it was so lucky, and he continued to take wickets afterwards against Sri Lanka, that he was given that first test in India, where he then had even more luck. England then created an Agar conundrum in that Bess's surprising success meant that he was very hard to drop. I mean, at this point, I was calling him Domino Best. After the Deadpool 2 character, you know what I'm talking about. And it meant that after 3 tests, Bess had 17 wickets and an average of 22, which made him even more undroppable. Of course, they had to drop him because at the end of that 3rd test, the first test against India, he had to be yanked from the attack for bowling full tosses. And this isn't a new thing for Bess, he's always struggled with controlling his length. So then they had to drop Bess, knowing that Moeen could only come in and play 1 test because he was due to leave, meaning that they would ruin Bess's confidence even more, and then they would still need him for later in the series. England got around this by just not picking a second spinner for the 3rd test of the series. They said they were gambling on how the pink balls behaved under lights, but we'll never know how the pink balls behaved under lights because they didn't get that far. And what would Bess have made sitting on the bench for the 2nd and 3rd test? He's probably never in his entire career going to get pitches that are going to spin or be more friendly to his kind of bowling. And then, of course, England finally do bring him back in a 3-man frontline attack. And if you want to know what everything I have just said means to a 23-year-old spinner still learning his craft, who was a backup spinner for his county team very recently, have a look at the pitch map that he bowled in that first over back. It looked like England were actually trying to give him the yips. He was bowling full tosses at times that wouldn't have bounced before the keeper, more short balls than even he usually bowls, and with 1 over he was struggling with line length as his pace went between 75 kilometers an hour and 90 kilometers an hour. On the final day of the series, Root started with him again. There were 2 left-handers at the crease. This was his chance to get a couple of wickets. He bowled 12 balls, and there were a couple of decent balls in that, but there was also a lot of boundaries. He bowled 3 short balls, 3 full balls. In those 12 balls, Root took him off, and we didn't see him again. But for many people, the focus will be on England's batting right now. And that's probably more fair than putting a lot of pressure on a 23-year-old who wasn't really supposed to play as many tests as he did. But let's make this really simple. These are the tests where England won, and these are the ones where they lost. These are the tests where Joe Root made all the runs, and these are the ones where he didn't. England basically turned themselves into perhaps the most expensive one-man band in history during this tour. This is Root's average against spin, and every other member of the touring party. I think it's fair to say that these numbers are going up against a quality Indian bowling attack. Except I've tricked you, these numbers also include the Sri Lankan bowlers. Without Root, England's batting against spin was pretty much non-existent against Sri Lanka's one-man attack and also against India's massively superior lineup. The combination of how they batted against spin and how they bowled against spin it's not ideal, is it? But it is worth noting that a bit like Root with bat and occasionally with ball, there was actually 1 English spinner who did stand up. It's worth thinking back to that first test in Chennai too, when it looked like Rishabh Pant was about to end Jack Leach as a human, let alone as a bowler. And he always struggles with left-handers, but this looked more vicious and like he may not be able to come back from it. But from there he dominated Pujara, and now I need you to see this tweet I sent. Now those Pujara stats include him facing a lot of Rangana Harat. Pujara faced the best left-arm finger spinner of the modern era on spinning pitches and never had a problem. And then he had issues with Jack Leach. We have to factor in the pitches here a little bit, but even so, Pujara really seemed to struggle with Leach, and he wasn't the only one. Leach did really well against the Indian right-handers. And outside of like 1 Jofra Spell and a couple of Jimmy Anderson, no other English bowler really had this kind of series. I mean, it is worth saying that I don't know if Jimmy Anderson has found a time machine or the ECB have just given up on analysts and they're just like cloning Anderson, but he's not 38, is he? He's just not 38. I don't believe that this was the series of a 38-year-old. But to go back to Jack Leach for one moment, he was still nowhere near as accurate or as probing as the Indian spinners. The England batsmen had to defend almost twice the amount of balls as their Indian counterparts. And that's because the English spinners gave far more balls to score from. And whether it be Moeen or Leach's over-pitch balls, or Joe Root's short balls, or Don Bess's both short and full balls, the England spinners just did not land the ball on the spot enough. But Leach at times in the last 18 months has looked like a haunted figure, trapped in his own cult status like, I don't know, a non-Hollywood Jarrod Leto. He proved to himself at least, and probably to the England selectors, that he could go up against the best players of spin and hold his own. And sure, the pitches helped him. And we're going to briefly mention them, and I don't want to talk too much about the pitches because they are pitches, and both teams play on them, but I do want to talk about the chat about pitches. You and most former players are not horticulturists. Neither are you experienced curators, and even if you are both of those things, chances are you know nothing about the local climate and grasses and all of these sorts of things that go into a pitch. If you want to complain about any of the pitches, that is your right as a carbon-based life form with vocal capabilities. But I'll say this, there is no way that the pitches in this series were as bad as the conversation about pitches in this series were. As far as I'm aware, the only captain in this series to publicly moan about the pitches was Virat Kohli in the first test. And yet you'd be forgiven for thinking that England was slagging it off every chance they got. The closest we got was maybe a leak story about England might complain about the third test pitch. And yet for 2 tests, every story, tweet, talking head was just going on and on about this. And the player who actually made the most sense about pitches that we should have actually listened to, but by this point we were all so busy banging our head against things that we weren't listening, was Ashwin, when he said, what is the idea of a good pitch? And does it even make sense? And is it even possible? I don't know. And I'm not going to talk about it anymore because, oh my God, there's been some words about it. So what I want to talk about is whether this is the best Indian cricket team ever. I think I might have gone from cold take to hot take in record time. And I know your uncle just unplugged his dial-up modem in disgust. But just hear me out. India have certainly had better batters in an entire lineup than they have in this one. They have had an all-time all-rounder. At times they've certainly had more high-quality spinners to choose from. And they have produced top-quality seam bowlers before. But they've never had this many all-rounders. And they've never probably batted this deep. And they've never had a platoon of quicks like ever. And they've never had spinners with home and away records like this before. They went 29 tests without a loss at one stage. If you're looking for a mathematical way to work out who the greatest sides in history are, you usually look at the win-loss ratio. So Australia with Bradman won 4 tests for every 1 loss. Australia in the 90s won 4.1 tests for every loss. The Great West Indies dynasty was 3.6 wins for every loss. And the South Africa team that could barely ever lose away from home of recent times won 2.6 tests for every 1 loss. India in the last 6 years have won 3 tests for every 1 loss. The next best team in the world over that time is New Zealand with 1.6. They've beaten Australia twice in a row, in Australia, their only wins in Australia. Yeah, if they want to be an all-time great side, they probably have to start winning a few series in England, South Africa, and New Zealand. But there are more test teams than ever before, more demands on the players, a 24-hour news cycle reactions, and this India team is just winning a lot. If there is a better India team home and away over a 6-year period than this, I would very much like to meet that team. And I understand that is probably the worst dating profile anyone has ever had. I mean, are we pre-dynasty? Are we mid-dynasty? Are we not even dynastic? Usually I would give a lengthy answer on this with charts and everything, you know, the kind of deal that I do. But I'll just say this, India's 3rd choice spinner just took 27 wickets in his first 3 tests at an average of 10.5 against one of the best teams in the world. Sometimes it's just better to enjoy the moment than, try and work it out.